importance of being part of a code, but actually thinking of establishing a code in your own country or region is also something that is very important. And you have people you can learn from on this. So I said I set up the Investment Winning Code alongside the British Business Bank and what was then the British Venture Capital Association, now it's called UK Private Capital. And we also brought on board with us the Association of Banking, UK Finance, and also CDFI, which are Community Development Fund Institutions. So we have got several partners in the Investment Winning Code in the UK. So, and I've seen how important it is to build that code based on those very same actions. But now I'd like to just turn to you, Inez, because, I mean, again, you're very much in the banking world, you know, very much supporting women, but I know you then, you know, took it upon yourselves to actually look at what was happening in the Investment Winning Code, but particularly from the banking side, and then take that forward. So tell us what you did and how you set up the WeFi code.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm totally wowed by the female founders. It's a fantastic field to get into, and I love the comment that you're not stained by having worked in corporate, so it's a blank slate, so that's fantastic. So I've worked in financial inclusion for many years. If you think about the population of the world, the bottom 2 billion people don't have access to formal financial services. And microfinance was a movement that started out, as you know, in Bangladesh many years ago, but the point is that the industry itself has always looked to scale, because scale was the only way that you could actually lower the cost to lend money. So about 8 years ago, we commissioned McKinsey to look at the role of data in driving market development, both from the banks and MFI's perspective. In other words, can you make money in this market? How big is it? Where are they? All of that. And then from the policymaker's perspective, how do we design policies that are really effective? And you can't do that without data. So the Women Entrepreneurship Finance Initiative is a multi-donor facility that's housed in the World Bank. It's got 14 countries contributing money. They've mobilized about 380 million directly from the bilaterals, but that's catalyzed a further 7 billion, right? So this is according to their numbers on the website. And Wendy Telecki, who runs that, asked us to come to their meeting, an annual meeting just before lockdown. And we brought Wincy Wong, who was Alison Rose's Chief of Staff or Project Manager for the Investing Women Code UK, to speak at that event, and also one of our members from BLC Bank in Lebanon, to speak about the role data has in driving market development and the business strategy for the bank. And Wincy spoke about the Investing in Women Code, which then caught the attention of Wendy at WeFi. And Wendy basically decided, well, why don't we try to mobilize and roll this out across different countries? And so we were involved essentially in designing the pilot, but the pilot has now reached 33 countries, are implementing what is now called the WeFinance Code, Women Entrepreneurs Finance Code. As Jenny alliterated, people have spoken about, essentially there's three basic elements. One is, overarching goal is to increase the volume of financing going to women-owned led businesses. But there's three things that signatories commit to, and there's 580 signatories in these 33 countries so far. They are central banks, they are other forms of data aggregators, they are the main banks in all of these markets, they are the largest microfinance institutions, we have some fintechs, now we're getting insurance companies, some funds are coming in, and so it is rolling.
These actions are very, very similar, and it's really what you can do with energy, but also, action behind that. So that's a great story. And then turning to you, Chantal, because obviously you were very motivated then to set up Code in the Netherlands. And can you give us a little bit story about the origins of that as well, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me, Jenny. So I used to work at the Dutch Development Bank and became very inspired about our clients, banks in emerging markets, already doing many programs for women entrepreneurs. And it started me to think about the situation in the Netherlands. I had a big international network. I had followed the Investing in Women Code and the work of Wendy for many years. And at that time I transitioned to ABN AMRO, one of the 3 big banks in the Netherlands, to set up inclusive banking and make products and services more accessible to women clients. And to me, ABN AMRO was just a little bit too small for the ambition I thought we should all have, but I definitely had. So in my view, we really need to mobilize the whole financial sector. So I was talking to Wendy and she said, over a kind of a digital coffee, well, why don't you implement the Wi-Fi code in the Netherlands? And I was like, yeah, ha ha ha. It's not something you do overnight. But then I think in the months after that, I just thought, okay, if we really want to move the needle, then at least I can give it a try. So I had 150,000 cups of coffee, as these things go. So persistence and patience is something you should bring along if you want to try something like this. But then we mobilized a working group, and within about 6 months signed the Dutch version of the Investing in Women Code. So it's called Code V. V is the first letter of the word vrouwen, women in Dutch. And we had 65 signatories committing to basically the same things that Inez pointed out, with one big difference, I think, in the Netherlands, and that's the governance of our code. So, in my view, the UK was very lucky to have the British Business Bank. I had all these ideas about the Ministry of Economic Affairs taking on that role in the Netherlands, or the Dutch Banking Association to do the data collection, but they thought that it should be private sector driven. So that's when one becomes creative. And so I found Erasmus Center of Entrepreneurship. Cathy is here today. She left in the meantime to set up her own female founder business. But together with the ECB and Deloitte, we were able to agree on data collection and aggregation and analysis. And we have now grown into a not-for-profit, a foundation in the Netherlands. We have 135 signatories. Those are banks, PE organizations, VC, but also ministries, governmental agencies, women networking organizations, and perhaps interesting, law firms, consultants, financial advisors. So we're really now expanding our footprint, I would say, in the whole financial sector and the value chain. And I think that's important because our goal, of course, primarily is to increase the amount of funding going to women entrepreneurs. But as you all know, you need to be a jack of all trades when you run an enterprise, and there's also legal stuff to think about, there's tax issues, there is human resource dilemmas. So I think these women entrepreneurs can be supported in many ways, also from a legal point of view, which we try to do with these law firms. And I'll pause there to give it back to you.
Thank you. I mean, you can see, how you can take an idea and start to then share that out. And so this is a great example of you didn't go, reinvent the wheel. You took on an existing opportunity, and that had been explored widely and already developed. Of course, and then it had origins in the ideas. As we said, then you build in a similar set of ideas and a similar set of objectives and goals, but also adapting it to your local area, adapting it to the context, so that you look at what do women need and what can we add to this as a community. and it is about building a community around it that really makes it work. And I think across the supply chain too, you would agree. So coming back to you, Inez, I think, really now this has been, it's been pushed out so widely, as you say, the engagement is huge. What would you see have been the impacts that you've had now, that you can see on both women's access to finance, but also perhaps those roles and leadership? What's it been achieving now, particularly in the banking and particularly in those developing countries where much of this is happening too?
Yeah, I think we conceptualized the progress of the code on two vectors. One was data and the other was national coalitions. On the data front, what's happened is, so the first thing that has to be done at the national level is to set the definition of women-owned-led. What do we mean by that as a national definition? So a lot of the work has been done on that. Many countries start at the benchmark of the IFC, which is 51%. But then, obviously, if you talk to many of the banks in our network, there's not a lot of businesses in their portfolio with that. So they've then lowered that threshold to 20% ownership and or a not a controlling interest, but a senior management role, a major decision-making role. So setting the national definitions is super important initially, and that's happened in all of these countries. So they now have national definitions. Then how do you get the data out of the bank system? And that's a massive challenge because of the legacy data. So if you looked at, for instance, RBS, now NatWest, they actually, like many banks, grew through acquisitions. So they have legacy systems, and they have customers in those legacy systems that they have to then go in and identify. So cleaning up the legacy database is super important and difficult, but it can be done, and it is being done. And then kind of obviously from then establishing that baseline and then moving forward, having the data systems there that you're capturing the gender of the loan applicant, but then also the shareholders. And in some countries now we're seeing integration of other databases into that database in order to identify and cobble together and classify them as women-owned or led. The most exciting aspect of this is that we now have dashboards in Nigeria and Bangladesh. It just goes to show you that the emerging markets are sometimes more advanced, certainly in financial inclusion, that have live dashboards where you can go onto the central bank website and look at and find the number of women who have access to loans, the volumes, savings, location. You click on a state in northern Nigeria and see how many women have access, what channels they're using, what products they have. So these databases are pulling through APIs directly from the financial services providers, the data. So they're updated and as on a daily basis, and they're integrating an increasingly diverse number of suppliers into the databases, including the credit bureau. So the credit bureau often has the best data actually on the sex of the owner and so on, and lots of other information. So automating those databases, and putting up those national dashboards is a kind of a revelation to the world, because now we can actually see the levels of financial inclusion. We can slice and dice it any way that we want. We can integrate with census data, all sorts of stuff. So that, for instance, in Colombia, in Latin America, now what they're doing is not only bringing in savings, all sorts of other bank products, but the insurance sector is coming in, the capital markets is coming in. So we're going to get a full read of